1, 2, 3, 4.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
All right, now let's roll into maybe my favorite part of the whole program as an old real estate, energy, pollution, dirt lawyer. The 300s. We've learned a lot, gentlemen. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. I think you've all already been introduced, and so we won't spend too much time on introductions because you're here to blow our minds yet again. They're loaded up, and we're so much smarter than we were 2 days ago, 2.5 days ago. But now we're going to focus on what is for our audience, our other feature issue, one of the two feature issues, pollinators and real redevelopment. Particularly on these exotic sites, landfills, brownfields, and then in the next session, mine lands. So with that, I will first introduce Mr. Meade Anderson, who I think folks know. He's leading the Brownfield program down there. We've got Paul Curran. He's dialing in. He's with BQ Energy, and he actually inspired me way back in the day when I started to diversify out of oil and gas. It was Paul's early work on solar on landfills that I finally was like, oh my gosh, we can do solar. And then you guys have also met Daniel and Nick from DMME. They're familiar faces to this audience, our repeat Brightfielders who were with us in 2019 at the History Museum in Richmond there, because they helped deliver some of our most highly rated sessions. So welcome back, and you guys have already done so much for the summit, Daniel and Nick. You guys look good, and how do you sound? How's everybody feeling today? Meade?
Yep, ready to go.
Awesome, man, take it away.
All right, thank you. Just introduction slide. Kelsey, next slide, please. 8 years ago, we really started pushing the reuse of landfills for things like solar, and we were met with skepticism and a little bit of suspicion about were we trying to put these sites back into a program. And the answer is no. We want to see these properties revitalized just like any large brownfields or small brownfield site out there. Next slide, please. So why use these landfills? Well, we've got 600 to 1,000 historic landfills scattered around Virginia, some of which we know about, a lot of which we don't. And most of them are just growing some invasive species these days. Some of them are being used for, shooting ranges or lay down yards for the counties, but they can be so much more. We've got a lot of industrially zoned properties with buildings, large slabs, old lagoons. They're sitting there. They can be something more. And you're going to hear a lot about formerly mined sites a little bit later on. Some of these sites really have limited potential reuse, and sometimes it's not related to the contamination at all. It's the fact that it no longer has a good ingress egress. It's challenges with zoning to have it rezoned to other uses. And, historically railroads took equipment in and out, and these days it might go through a residential neighborhood, and it's just not applicable for reuse. So they do have reuse possibly as solar and alternative energy. Next slide. And once again, the policy of Virginia about encouraging remediation, restoring properties, removing barriers, and providing incentives. And we've talked a lot about this today. So next slide. Do your due diligence. I can't emphasize this enough. Even for solar projects, you need to do your due diligence, ASTM standard phase 1s, phase 2s, and you need to go a step further on some of these. You need to understand what's out there on the properties. How much cover's on that landfill? Can you drive piles, or do you have to deal with a thin veneer of soil that was scattered over it? And many of these historic landfills, what we call pre-reg landfills, have very limited cover type materials, and they certainly don't have caps. So be aware of what's out there. Make sure we don't have exposed waste, erosional issues, leachate. All these go into just about any brownfield site out there. And these landfills are not that different than other brownfields. Know what you're buying. Know what you're leasing. Next slide. Engage the staff early. Do your due diligence. Use the tools that we have for all of the brownfield sites. Know the regulatory status. Meet with us. Talk to us about it. Take appropriate care. Appropriate care is not allowing large erosional trenches to pop up and, irritate your neighbors. Fix the problems. Get your permits. Get your permits. Get your permits. I can't emphasize that enough, and we've talked about that today. Next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of landfills, at least how we look at them. And I'm going to start kind of from the bottom or from the middle. Permitted landfills have permits. We need to go through the permitting staff to deal with those. But that's probably the smaller subset. There's construction and demolition debris landfills out there. They are a great place to start with for potential solar. And we've got sites that are out of post-closure. They were permitted landfills. They went through post-closure monitoring. They have requested termination of their permit. And some of those do have UECA restrictions on them. I think that we could work with most UECA restrictions, say that quickly, to get a redevelopment on it. Now for the greater subset out there, what we call pre-regulation landfills, and they're broken up into 3 different categories as I see them. Pre-71, which we really don't know about too many of those, but they are out there. I can think of dozens of them that I'm aware of. Permit by letter, around 1971, we started sending out letters that said, yeah, go dump. Looks like a good spot to us. It didn't have a lot of controls on it. Regulations started coming into place in '88, so many of those closed prior to December 21st, 1988, leaving a nice little Christmas present for us. Some of those did continue as what we call 1205s, unlined facilities that accepted waste for a while longer, and then they had to be closed by December 31st, 2020. So that date's just rolled past. So these are the different type of landfills. If you're bringing one to us, talk to us about it, and let's figure out what the regulatory status is, just like any other brownfield site out there, and figure out how to reuse that property for whatever the future use is going to be. Next slide. We were lucky in that some of our early calls for solar were heard by O2 EMC in Bedford, and they developed on some buffer land to Bedford's landfill. Stuck sheep out there, which seemed to be one of the biggest PR things that they could have done, and also demonstrated it was going to offset their sewage treatment plant costs. So that was one of the first to crack the landfill type of solar development in Virginia. And that was a great project. Next slide. Some contact information, reach out to us, and I'm going to give it back to Dan to pass it on off. Thank you.
Oh yeah, sure. Hang on, I don't have my video, but thank you. Sorry, Meade, I wasn't ready for that. So smooth with all that substance. Yeah, you're a real pro, man. I've seen you testify before Congress. Thanks for everything that you've done flying the flag to get us this far. Standing on your shoulders, my friend. Many more years of service yet to go. Thank you. Salute you. And now I think we're going to turn to Mr. Curran. Is that correct, Paul? No? Oh, I'm sorry. DMME. I'll see you guys. Hey, 3 days. Yeah, my brain is mush, but I've earned it the right way. So cool. Come on in, Nick.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Dan.
Sure.
I'm going to kick it off for the DMME folks, and then I will pass it to Daniel Kestner after I finish up. So let me go ahead and get started here. All right. For those folks that may not have been on earlier or day one, I'm Nick Polier. I'm with Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. We have several divisions within DMME, and I am with the Division of Energy. And some folks may be aware, we're going through a restructure, reorganization. So DMME will cease to exist, and we will become the Virginia Division of Energy. And so there'll be some name changes, and folks will be aware of those as DMME announces it. So I like to always start with this slide just because when folks usually think about DMME, they're usually thinking about mine regulation, mine enforcement, specifically kind of in our mine lands area. But obviously we do a lot of energy resource conservation. And one thing that is prevalent in a lot of what we do, and I know Daniel will talk about it some as well, is economic development is a part of everything we do. So economic, community, and workforce development are all considerations in everything we do, including when we're talking about mine impacted lands and clean energy opportunities on them. So I'd just like to start with that usually, because if you go to our website, that's taken from our purpose statement and it's on there, but it can be difficult to find. So solar opportunities. We have approximately 125,000 acres of mine land in Virginia. Now that includes coal mine lands, and you can see that in the southwest corner where the preponderance of those are. But that also includes mineral mining lands and abandoned mine lands throughout the state. So you've got a pretty good dispersal throughout the state of mine lands. And for us, for DMME, Daniel and myself, we see those as an asset, and it's an asset inventory. And there's opportunities there. Now, not every asset is going to be suitable for renewable energy deployment, but if it isn't suitable for, say, solar or wind, it may be suitable for something else. And Daniel will go a little bit more in detail on this. But in order to go down that trail and determine, you know, what is suitable, it requires due diligence, and it requires due diligence on our part. And it's definitely something that we've developed over the years. You know, when we started, I think Daniel and I set out with the goal of developing a tool that was plug and play, one size fits all. And we quickly figured out that is not the case. That doesn't work because every developer, utility, landowner, stakeholder, they all have their own set of goals or priorities and site characteristics. So you can't tailor a one size fits all. But over the years, we developed a process, and we've come to the point where it's a first look analysis, for lack of a better term, for those folks that may be interested in looking at opportunities on previously mined lands. Anyone that comes and meets with us and submits a request to have us look at possible opportunities, you know, we're going to help narrow down that 125,000 acres, maybe to something that's a little bit more manageable. It's certainly not going to be an in-depth final analysis because those folks are going to go do their own due diligence as well. But it's a good place to start. We can help narrow it down based on what is important to the individual requester. And it's also important to note that our data is available to the public. It always has been. We have several locations where you can get this information. We have a mapping website. So you'll see some maps. These maps are available on our website. The data is available through our permitting and our mine resources. So it's nothing that's not available to the public. It's just the way that we are able to pull it in, and Daniel will talk about that. The way we're able to pull it in and analyze it and present it to folks makes it a little more digestible. Some other things why mine land is now, you know, becoming more of an asset. Obviously, folks have heard about the Virginia Clean Economy Act. That shifted the landscape. Once that was signed into effect in less than a year ago in July, that really increased the folks coming to DMME asking, hey, we'd like to sit down and meet with you. We've been doing it for the last 4 or 5 years, but once that happened, it picked up the number of requests we were receiving. And those requests are coming from not only developers, but utilities and even landowners looking at opportunities. So there's been growth there, and that's a good thing. That's what we were hoping for when we began. And just a disclaimer, I'm not going to go real in depth on the solar siting process because Daniel and I are also in the 301 session following this one. And so we're going to go more in depth there on specific siting and what goes into that. I'll touch on it a little bit, and Daniel will too. But Another big push was carve outs. We're now seeing carve outs, not only by the IOUs, but the Commonwealth of Virginia, specifically calling for development on coal impacted lands, mine impacted lands, and brownfields. So those are huge. Those are good. Those have pushed more requests to us. We have more folks meeting with us, and there's considerations that, you know, we generally take into account when we sit down and meet with folks. You know, terrain is always a limiting factor, specifically in Southwest Virginia. And then you also have to look at the land use type. And this comes into play when we're talking about possible development on permitted sites. So if a site's permitted and reclamation is going to take place, what has to happen after mining is completed? Do you have to restore it to original contour? Can you leave it flat? Is it forested? Is it agriculture land? So those are things that must be taken into account. And our hope that is working with the interested stakeholders, we might be able to help affect that reclamation outlook and change the end use. There's a waiver process that's available where we might be able to make it favorable, not only to the permit operator, but also the folks looking to develop. Other considerations, grid proximity is always going to be a factor. And then local perceptions, although it's more of a problem in Northern Virginia, Central Virginia, we see it some down here, and then locality. So each locality, depending on their experience, may have more experience working with solar or renewable energy. So those are some considerations that we look at. Again, we'll talk about it more in depth in the 301 session. I quickly want to touch on this, kind of what got us to the point, what shifted the landscape, and there was some legislative executive actions. We started way back in 2014 with the Virginia Energy Plan. That was the first release by then Governor McAuliffe that set forth clean energy targets, and that got the ball rolling. That's about the time where DMME began looking at our mine lands and how can we help foster development on them. EO 43 was released in 2019. That brought us to the goal for 100% carbon free. And we've talked ad nauseum about the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And those are some of the things that you see there on the slide that were touched on. The Brownfields Fund and Program, which was passed in this last legislative session, that's a big one. There's big opportunities there. It calls for DMME. We're going to develop a guidebook. Obviously, this will be in concert with some other folks, but develop a guidebook for renewable energy and energy storage development on brownfields and previously mined lands. So we have to develop and publish that, but it also establishes a brownfields program or a fund. And there's some funding that's going to be available as an incentive to do this. Other legislative actions, we had wins in terms of establishing PPA capacities, net metering capacity, and shared solar bills. So all those helped push along further the development of solar in the Commonwealth. And then we have some of our programs that also we use in concert with looking at the opportunities for solar deployment. Our abandoned mine land and abandoned mine land pilot program funding opportunities. Those are available to folks that want to look at doing innovative reclamation, innovative projects on abandoned mine lands. And then our Soul Smart, CPACE, we have our Solar Enhanced Energy Performance Contracting, all have solar components to them. And I do want to mention the Virginia Soul Tax tool that's out there for localities to look at a revenue model in terms of what revenue options might be available based on the tax strategy they decide to follow. And that's a joint project with the University of Virginia Weldon Cooper Center. So get a little bit into where we are now. So as I mentioned, we're at a point where we're seeing quite a few requests for DMME to do this site analysis. And I want to emphasize that it's an interactive process. So as I said, it's not a one size fit all. We're going to sit down with the interested stakeholder and try and get a feel for what are you looking for in your sites? What are your must-haves? What's not as important? Is there a certain territory, service territory you're looking for? Is there a region in Virginia that would be ideal? So we work through those in the initial meetings in order to build this initial analysis. And it's important that site, as I mentioned, site characteristics vary by the requester. Some folks want to come to us and say, hey, we'd like to see what is available from 2 megawatts up to 10 megawatts. Or 2 to 5 megawatts. We don't want to go real big. We'd like to stay small, and we'd like that to be in Dominion service territory. Other folks, we've gotten requests for 100 megawatts in anywhere in Virginia that's good, 100 megawatts. So it's going to vary. And again, the important part is that you have clearly defined priorities and goals, and that you communicate them so that we can give you the best product. And we do, as I mentioned, we have additional site that's usually beneficial to folks in terms of what status the site is in. Is it producing? Is it not producing? What is the permit status? Is it partially reclaimed, fully reclaimed? What does it look like on site if it's being reclaimed? Is it primarily flat? Has earth been moved and there's some contour? We also will have, through our permitting database, operation type. So is it a coal loadout, coal processing facility? Is it underground, surface, and the status of that operation as well. And then sometimes this is what most folks are interested in, is ownership information. And sometimes we have that data if it's available in the permit. Other times, these sites can change hands multiple times. So we may not have the most current owner, and there requires some due diligence on the requester's part. You may have to go to the county to find that if we don't have it, but we will have the operator information, and we're able to give you a good start. And in addition to that, we're on site. So our inspectors, Daniel, myself, we've been on site in these locations. If someone submits a request and there's a good possibility, we're going to go on site. We may already have pictures. We may have flown the drone to do a survey of it. So we have a lot of resources in addition to the site analysis that's available to a person interested in requesting. And those are usually follow-up meetings after we present the sites and they want to dig a little bit deeper. So I'm sure people are sick of listening to me talk. So this is my contact info. I am based out of Big Stone Gap. I manage a couple of different programs. So I go all over the state, but I am out of the Big Stone Gap office. And if anyone has questions about this or anything else, feel free to send me an email, give me a call, and I'd be happy to sit down and have a talk with you. And I'll stop sharing there, and Daniel's gonna follow me, and he's gonna give you a little bit more detail, the good stuff. So I'll turn it over to you, Daniel, and it's all yours.
Just find that mute button, pal. Can't hear you though. Got to hit the mute on the Zoom button. There you go. Magic button. Take it away.
All these computer problems, right? So I'm going to share my screen. You see me okay, Dan?
Yep, looks good. Sounds good. You're not in presentation mode, so we can see the power. There you go. Step ahead of me there.
All right.
Perfect.
So I'm Daniel Kestner. I'm the innovative reclamation program manager for DMME, stationed in Southwest Virginia. I'm going to talk about the other lands, mine lands, like Nick mentioned. I know it's late in the day, day 3. The sun's getting low, but let's hang in there. We're going to go through some information real quick. And we'll talk a little bit about the innovative reclamation program. It's a new program at DMME. Most folks probably haven't heard of it yet. As Nick mentioned, the reorganization, the things are going on there. In particular in Southwest Virginia, we look at mine lands across the state, but in the coal fields is really more of a focus, obviously. And looking at mine land as an asset, that's one thing we do. Kind of perceived negative as a positive, and try to look at reuse and repurposing of mine lands, and with an emphasis on economic and community benefits. Beneficial uses of these sites with an obvious focus on energy, solar being the main one at this time, but really you can include multiple things. It could be maybe, a mine-based pump storage system, or a battery storage system, and even wind where it's feasible. There's some possibilities there. I think Will Payne mentioned Project Oasis and looking at the use of underground mine pools for HVAC systems, for energy efficiency, for data centers. So, looking at innovative approaches to reuse and repurposing of mine land is really what the program is about. And we want to look at that, the post-mining land uses, and really the post-mining economy of the coal field. Thinking about just transition, economic justice and transition of a traditionally, energy producing region, and what can we do to help with that? Majority of the permits, we'll get into that a little bit about a coal mine permit, have a designated land use of hayland or pasture, and the other major land use is unmanaged forest. So that throughout the process, the permitting process, they would have to designate that land use. That's one of the ways in which a permit is released when it achieves that post-mining land use. So looking at options for currently permitted sites to see if there's other opportunities there. And we want to look at solar. I think we'll mention this too as a driver for investment in the region. And as an attractor for investment or reinvestment or development, on other mine lands to help diversify the post-mining economy. There's a slide Nick shared, and it's a distribution of mine land throughout Virginia. The Southwest Virginia portion is obviously coal mines. We're working on a fuller inventory of non-coal mineral mine sites throughout the state. So that'll be something that we're working on the next year, and hopefully it'll help a lot of people target some of those sites as well. But one definition I like to use of repurposing is repurposing is the process by which an object with one use value is transformed or redeployed as an object with an alternative use value. And really, that's what we're trying to do with a lot of these mine lands. And it makes a lot of sense to repurpose and reinvent coal mines into solar sites rather than looking at prime farmland. And we've talked about this over the last few days. And these coal mines are typically away from a lot of, from people. They're out of sight of the public. The view shed stays clear, and they obviously check the box on the NIMBY not in my backyard issue. So they're, good reuse of a coal mine would be a solar facility. And this is one of my favorite photos of a reclaimed coal mine permit in Southwest Virginia. And this one was had a post-mine land use of hayland, pasture land. They cut hay on this one. It's very productive, but it's a good example of coal mine reclamation in Southwest Virginia. The good work that's been done. We'll continue that because I'm going to, up to this point, Dan's done a fantastic job keeping it clean. But I hate to do this. I'm going to say a dirty word, Dan, and that's coal. Because I think it's important that we look back a little bit to see forward. Coal mining started in Virginia in the 1800s in Southwest Virginia, mostly underground coal operations. You know, in the 50s, mining practices evolved. You know, you started seeing larger equipment where they could begin doing more large-scale surface mining, and it started ramping up. And Virginia is one of the state first programs that had a state program for coal mine reclamation in '66. And then in the 70s and 77, it's a key date for a lot of our programs, for the abandoned mine land program in particular. You know, that boom of environmental regs that were passed and those laws were passed, and this is where SMACA came from, Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act. And then in '81, Virginia took primacy over that federal program. You know, requirements for reclamation and everything have changed over time. But one thing I wanted to point out in particular about this timeline is 1990, and that was Virginia's peak coal production. So in 1990, you know, about 30 million tons were mined, and then over the past several years, you know, coal production has been less than half of that. You know, 12 to 13 million tons, and that most of that's, you know, metallurgical coal. So the downturn in Virginia's coal economy has been happening, you know, over time. It's been some time, and it's continuing to happen, and that likely will accelerate with the Clean Economy Acts and things that are going on. So really, that downturn in the coal economy and those coal jobs shouldn't be looked at in the same way as like a large manufacturing plant. You know, it's happened over, you know, over a period of time and not all at once. So again, here's what we're looking at. You know, again, we've been looking statewide, but we really focused in and started on the Virginia Appalachian coal field. You know, as Nick mentioned, we know there's a lot of challenges, the terrain, you know, topography, there's mixed utility service areas, you know, a lack of some utility infrastructure data. However, you know, DMME, we know the mines, we have the history, we have all kinds of data from regulatory past, and we're willing to help, and that's the main thing. There's approximately 100,000 acres of coal impacted lands in Southwest Virginia. There's current permits, of which there's about 70,000 acres there. Released or former permits, and then pre-law surface mine. And I just kind of lump it all together and say it's, you know, mined land. But there's different reclamation requirements and things that took place on most of these sites. You know, of the 70,000 acres that are currently permitted, many thousands of acres are headed towards release. So they're getting towards the end of the permit life, and mining has ceased a lot of places, and they're finishing up reclamation, so there'll be thousands of acres that will go to that release status. And I wanted to include a couple of pictures here. This is a photo of a permit during, you know, reclamation process, early reclamation process, and moving material, moving dirt. You know, coal mining, surface coal mining is a large earth moving construction project, if you want to look at it that way. About 60% of the cost of reclamation on most of these sites is regrading. That's moving dirt. Because Nick mentioned that approximate original contour, trying to get it back to that original contour requires a lot of earth movement to do that. This is the site close by. You know, there's some contemporaneous reclamation that takes place. As one part of the mine is active and moves on, reclamation is taking place behind it. So it's contemporaneous in that way. And this is a more recent reclamation of a large surface mine. You know, in the next session, we'll talk more utility scale, so it's a little bit of a teaser. But, you know, one question I want to ask and kind of put it out there and to think about is, how could regrading be changed on an active mine to facilitate a post-mining land use for solar energy development? And if you notice in the picture, there's some transmission lines across this old coal mine. And this is another good picture of a reclaimed surface mine. You can see down in the Highland Valley where there could be some potential for solar. A lot of sun in that photo. That's why I included that. And I really won't go much through this process. I know I want to save some time for Paul and hear his comments. You know, looking at how we help customers, you know, go through and evaluate sites, and, you know, we're always willing to do that. We've had Nick and I together, I don't know how many different developers and landowners and, you know, whoever we've talked to, are always willing to help out. And a good first step, I think, for a lot of them when they start looking at mines is to give us a call. We're willing to help. we've utilized a lot of our mapping services in the past, our enterprise geographic information system. We have a lot of data on a lot of these sites. Sometimes I hate to say we know how the soft all these mine sites, but it's really important to look at some of the details if you're looking at specific sites, and we're definitely willing to help and conduct that that initial analysis or first pass analysis. And this is some quick examples, Dan. We've made some different elevation models. This is from older data. I hate to go through them quickly, but I'm going to show them. And the kind of a newer approach to the analysis process is using LiDAR, high resolution data to get some really down the weeds and the details on the sites and how we do that. And this is their site, our online GIS site where we have a lot of data and can share a lot of information that's open, available to the public. And I want to just make sure that was available in the slide deck. With that, I'll turn it over.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. Terrific presentation. Hey, Paul, still with us? You look good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Oh, good. Yeah, it looks. Yeah, I didn't notice, but you're always looking stellar, including when you joined us in 2019 down in Virginia, and we really put you to work. I think you did 3 sessions, but such is your vast experience and expertise in this emerging field. This time you've joined us already, but to reintroduce Paul, he's the founder of BQ Energy, and they've been doing this, I think, as long as anybody else in the known universe. So without further ado, for those who don't know, one of the founding fathers of this Brightfield redevelopment movement, Mr. Paul Curran.
Thank you so much, Dan. We're at the 300 level of this program, and the 300 level means that you've been, you passed your exams on 100 and 200. My job is to kind of go from there into, okay, you can do this. Everybody that's in this session, and there's about 90 of you out there, is really here for one reason, and it's kind of like, what's in it for you? How do you go about applying this to something real? And it's my job to kind of give you a little bit idea of that. I'll tell you kind of, first off, you can do this, and there's some resources, 2 of which have been just incredibly well presented to you just now. I'll show you how we go about doing this, and then some current examples of what other people are thinking about it and so forth. I should start with the last half an hour or so, which is you've had the environmental regulators of the state of Virginia sit here and tell you that they would like you to do this, and that's an enormous help. They're current, they understand what the challenges are, and then you've had one of the biggest land resources anywhere in the country, but certainly the biggest one for the state of Virginia. Again, speak expertly on what you're going to need to kind of move these sort of opportunities into real live opportunity projects. Job of a developer is to say, okay, here's an idea. How do I get this into being a real live site, a real live thing? Dan, am I supposed to share my screen, or is there somebody there that's going to pop up slides for this?
I believe Kelsey is standing by at your direction, and
Yep, give me just 1 second to share my screen.
Great.
Speak of our superstar, and she shall appear. Even COVID can't keep her down.
Great. Super. So you can flip that one and go to slide 2 if you would. Thank you very much. And so what we're going to give is a little bit of examples of, how do we go about doing this? So I'll show you a little bit of, some existing projects that, might, spark an idea in your head. And then I'm going to focus on a couple of projects individually. And again, this is the 300 level class. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in specific, not about equipment. I'm not going to talk about solar panels or anything. If you have questions, please do ask them. But more about the development process of what do you have to look for? What do you have to go through to get to a successful project, which is an operating project at the end. So Kelsey, if you could hit the next one. So this is the obligatory commercial about us. We are a relatively small development shop. We focus only on brownfields and landfills, and brownfields and landfills is a little bit broad. Obviously, we've worked with Nick and Dan quite a bit in terms of mine land, those types of things. We've worked on military bases that have been closed and so forth. So, brownfields and landfills are a little bit broad. Somebody just put in the chat room a couple of minutes ago about green banks. Somewhere about 3/4 of the way down the page here, we've had funding for both project level debt and also corporate level debt from the New York State Green Bank. And so we can talk about that a little bit more as we go through as well. I'm going to go to the next chart, which is a little bit interesting. This is an out-of-date map, actually, but the brighter people in the room would notice that there's some dots in Virginia and West Virginia, and those weren't there a couple years ago. And those dots are growing. There's lots of dots. We're not allowed to talk about all of them because they're corporate in nature. But thanks to the session 2 years ago, you know, this is taking root and taking hold. There's a lot of projects in development. These are real projects, and they're with real people that, you know, Fortune 500 companies. And the message is getting out quite clearly and so forth. Yesterday, while I wasn't in this session, was speaking with a city in Texas, a very large one, that is looking for the 101 class. And, you know, how do we go about doing this type of thing? I think it's an important message of using brownfields, landfills for this type of use. It's a good idea. I've said many times, and I've not been corrected. You know, we've worked on many dozens of projects of this nature. I have never had somebody call me up after we built one and come back and said, you know, this was a lot worse than you said. You know, generally speaking, solar is a good neighbor. It doesn't play loud music in the middle of the night. It's awfully quiet. There's very little traffic going in and afterwards. And it's a heck of a lot better than the dump that existed there beforehand. You know, many of the sites that Dan just presented were very picturesque. They were pretty. They were looking, you know, really nice and so forth. But they are abandoned mines that have just kind of grown over and so forth, and they need a new purpose. They've got humongous power lines that can take energy out. The world needs electricity as we start getting into more and more, you know, electric cars and other uses like that. The world's going to need more electricity. So these are excellent uses for these types of properties, and I strongly encourage you, you know, if you're in this session, you're in there for a reason. You're on the right path, and I hope you get to the next step as well. Next one, Kelsey. So here's the couple of charts that will be projects that we've done, not so much to brag necessarily, but to show you, okay, this isn't that difficult. Here's the project not too far from you in Annapolis, Maryland. It started up about 2-3 years ago. It's 18 megawatts, which is still, I believe, the largest operating solar farm on a landfill in the US. There's several more that we're working on now that will surpass it very soon. A couple of really cool ones I'm going to highlight at the end of this. But this went through, it took a couple of years to get through development. Most of that was simply getting through the discomfort factor on the part of people that were going to sign up for a long-term power purchase agreement. You know, solar economically is a large capital infusion, very low operating costs, no fuel cost. And so what you're trying to do from an economic, you know, perspective, the deal is to amortize that capital cost over as long a period of time as you can. The way we do that is we sell electricity under very long contracts. So we're looking to do that with counterparties that we know are going to be there for a very long time. I know we're going to talk about PPAs later on, but basically we're looking for people like a university, a hospital, a government entity that we know is going to be there for a very long period of time. So we can sign a 25-year power purchase agreement to sell the electricity. We did that in the case of Annapolis to the school district, the city of Annapolis, and the county, and basically said, we're going to sell that electricity for a long time. That allows us to basically amortize the capital cost over 25 years and allows them to get a better price, which is competitive with the cost of electricity they could pay elsewhere. Very important for early adopters. They're benefiting now from a little bit lower cost electricity. They'll benefit in the future even more because that power price will get even more attractive because it's a fixed price over time. So this is a project that's been operating for a couple of years. It's, you know, again, on a landfill, it's a very large landfill, and has been a really successful project. The next one's about 5 or 6 kind of quick hitters, if you do that, Kelsey. This is just projects that we happen to own. VQ owns some projects. We finance projects with other people. So these are the ones that happen to be 5 or 6 that we do own. Various sizes, most of them are in New York or Connecticut, easy for us to get to. The one in Atop, in Atop, New York, we're actually going to be expanding that. It's going to be about 4 times the size of that in a year from now. The one on the bottom, which is obviously a construction picture in Mount Kisco, New York, is just north of New York City. The reason I put that in there, it is operating now. It started a couple months ago. is that it's a solar plus storage. So two things there that are different. Number one, a trend around the country is to sell power to individual homes. If I went through the list of the top 4 or 5 projects up there, most of those have sold their power to a school or a university or somebody like that. In Mount Kisco, we really did door-to-door power sales, and that's the movement around the country now, community power. If you would like to use green power in your home, you basically buy a subscription, like a CSA, into a facility like in Mount Kisco. Frankly, when this movement started, I was scared to death. The idea of, we all get those annoying phone calls from people, wouldn't you like to buy cheaper power, et cetera, et cetera. When we started this process, I thought this is not gonna work. We sold out in a month. It was incredibly fast. People like this idea, and it works very, very well. The other thing about this project, which is going to be incredibly important over the coming years, it's got some little storage attribute to it. So we've got some Tesla batteries, a few megawatt hours of capacity. You know, we realized that if we're going to be able to do that on larger scale projects, such as we're going to do in Virginia, we have to own and understand the battery storage business a lot better. So we incorporated that into a project that we own. You know, it took some, you know, bruises and cuts to make sure that we did it right. But it's a comfortable thing now for us, and it's something that you're going to see an awful lot more of energy storage as we go along. The next one, Kelsey. So this is kind of how we go about doing our business, and we use a 5-step process, and it's relatively standardized in project management. There's nothing unique to us. But basically, we start with phase 1, which is the yellow stuff on the left, the evaluation phase. And we go all the way to phase 5, which is the blue stuff on the right, which is operations. The red line kind of cutting through there says we expect projects to not be successful occasionally. So we'll have a lot of bright ideas come in the door. Somebody will call us up and say, hey, you know, I've got this, you know, nifty brownfield over here, and wouldn't it be great? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. So the red line drops over time in terms of the number of projects. The goal is to have them drop early. So we do an evaluation process. We're looking for interconnection. That's what IX stands for, in the evaluation phase. And we do a permitting analysis, basically look at everything that could go wrong in the evaluation phase, and then start defining things a lot better as we go through, you know, the selection phase and the development phase and so forth. We're doing contracts in selection and development. We're doing financing during that period, and we're getting ready to make sure everything is done right. One typographical error, I was debating the other day as to whether or not the selection phase was going to, on the low end, was either 3 or 6 months. Unfortunately, I put down 3 and 6 months, looking like 36. So it's not 36 months on the bottom, it's either 3 or 6 months, leading to 18 months on the long end. But as we go through, you'll see that we're winding up with construction in phase 4, and that typically takes about 6 months. And construction of a solar farm is generally a lot simpler than construction of most other assets. It's a lot easier than running a mine or those types of things. What I'm going to do is touch next on a couple of projects that are in phase 4, phase 3, phase 4, kind of getting into late development and construction. And then I'm going to go into a couple of projects that are in phase 2, still in the early stage development, just so you get an idea of what are we doing and how do we go about doing that. So the next one is about to start construction as soon as the snow and the ice goes away from upstate New York. This is West Valley, New York, not your classical brownfield. It used to be a nuclear fuels reprocessing center. It was started up in the 70s, and once you start up a nuclear fuels reprocessing center, even though you shut it down, it's going to be there forever. It is not the kind of place where people should be living. It's perfectly safe, but nobody wants to live next to a nuclear fuels reprocessing center for sure. They have a lot of land in their backyard, buffer land, and I heard Meade just talking about buffer land on one of their projects. And that's what this is really is. The other thing that's true about a nuclear fuels reprocessing center, which is true of a lot of our brownfield projects, is that it used a lot of electricity. So when you're using a lot of electricity and then you stop, very rarely does the utility come in and take out the power line. So when we came into this site and we were called about it, you know, the owners of the site said to us that, you know, you can use the land, you can use anything that's there, but we're not paying any money for you to do that. So we have a lease from the owner of the site. We went through the whole process of a relatively straightforward process of development. There is no pollution on this brownfield. They're simply a bad neighbor, if you will, and that's pretty common. One of the wind farms that we built early on was next to the oil refinery, and it was there because it's buffer land that the refinery needed to have. Similarly here, this is buffer land, and it's a perfectly good use for it. We were able to tie into the power lines, and it made an awful lot of sense. As I say, we're ready for construction on this. It'll be built probably within the next 6 months. Upstate New York, a lot of good cooperation with the utility. We built several projects in National Grid service territory. We're all learning, and when you work with a utility on the second or third time, the process gets a lot easier. So Dominion is really, up the learning curve now, and it's great to see them participating in this whole conference as we're going through. But the next one is actually a question that came up the other day from Laura at the EPA. The Newport, Rhode Island, this is a Navy base, a very large and maybe the oldest Navy base in the U.S. They used to use an awful lot of fuel oil. They had fuel oil storage tanks. They stopped doing that over time, but the fuel oil storage tanks were still there. They eventually took them down, and they had basically excess land that had some pollution. They also had a landfill. The left-hand side of this slide is actually a landfill property right on Narragansett Bay. The right-hand side is one of the former fuel oil storage tanks, and there's two of them. This land has been sitting empty since the 1980s. It's very common for us to see that kind of a history where people took down whatever they were doing a long time ago. Again, there are power lines right to the sites where they used to use pumps, and took an awful lot of time to get through permitting in this case because there's several different jurisdictions. The Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, RIDEM, and the EPA both have stakes in this. Not unusual for a brownfield site that you'll wind up with sort of split jurisdictions where the EPA is concerned about some aspects, perhaps a Superfund site. The state might be concerned about other aspects. And you just need to set up a good cooperative relationship to do that. This has worked very, very well. We expect to start construction later this year, and it'll be into operation in 2021. I'm going to go to two new projects, and just to kind of set the stage for how do you start one of these. And you'll hear me talk a lot about, we love all our projects. They're all great. This is one that I've just fallen in love with. And this is the Sunnyside Energy project in Houston, Texas. I've been to Houston a million times. I used to work in the oil industry before I started at BQ Energy. This project is 5 miles from City Hall in Houston, and it's 300 acres of landfill. It has no reason to exist, and it's amazing that it's existed this long. I hope that we can talk a little bit with Meade as we wrap this up, if I don't take the whole time, about this is a pre-regulation landfill. It was closed in the 70s. And it's important to kind of consider how do you go about doing those types of properties and so forth. The city is on board with this. It's a landfill which has got tremendous number of trees grown all over it. And from a permitting point of view, it's going to take a tremendous amount of cooperation as we go through. The city of Houston, I would have thought when I went down there to start this project off, would be kind of the last place you'd expect to see somebody saying we want as big a solar project as we can get. But the city of Houston is all in on this, and it's amazing to see, and it's great to see. If you didn't think that Houston would be the last place to do one of these, the next slide is probably the last place you would have expected. Columbus, Ohio would be proud if you called them the coal capital of the world a decade ago. Columbus, Ohio passed a resolution in election day 4 or 5 months ago that they will go 100% renewables next year. And they've signed contracts to get it done. And they've signed a contract through AEP, the local utility, basically to convert an old landfill into a solar farm. Again, about 50 megawatts. This project has been going as smoothly as anything I've ever worked on because people want it to happen. American Electric Power, the city of Columbus, and everybody else is moving tremendously quickly. It's been a very smooth process. It's a great landfill that was closed in the 1990s. We're looking forward to having it run next year in the city of Columbus. I've been talking for a long time, and I want to leave room for questions if we can. So I'm going to stop there and open it up. Dan, however you'd like to do that.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I was riveted. Just terrific stuff, and you speak to it so well. We do have just a few minutes just for everybody else. If you don't want to dive in just for a few bonus questions, stand up, because we're coming right back at the top of the hour for 3:01. But Meade, maybe if you're there, it's something else that I hear too. These pre-closure landfills. It's pops up in different states in unique ways. Like Minnesota has its own landfill situation they're trying to work through. And of course, we can't, just because we're going out to an old landfill doesn't mean that we can solve all of its problems on a, what is really just a long-term interim project on some of these, do not disturb land caps. Mr. Anderson, come back in and maybe you and Paul can toggle back and forth on that. If we've got him, because Meade sometimes dials in from a secure location with questionable Wi-Fi.
I'm sorry, what was the question, Dan?
Go ahead, Paul.
So yeah, let me frame the question for you, Meade. We've hit a couple of landfills that are sort of pre-regulation, and we hit brownfields all the time that are not as cleaned up as much as the DEQ or EPA would like them and so forth. And there's an assumption that, okay, well, the solar farm's going to get built there. It can bring the landfill up to current standards. And the solar farm does not have the budget to do that. So the question really to you is, how do you kind of perceive that conundrum? If a landfill is not up to 1996 standards or 2021 standards, how do you view a project which is going to put a solar farm on top of it and not change the current status of the landfill or brownfield?
Yeah, we discussed this recently internally, and I don't think that we can require somebody to bring a landfill up to standards. The permit's expired, it's historic, it's out of our program. So if there's still an active permit on that landfill, there are some concerns there, but that is going to be capped. So these pre-regulation landfills, I don't really see it as technically possible. So, with that said, we do need to have good cover on it, no erosional trenches, but all of that.
Correct.
Well, that was easy. See, Mr. Anderson, the Commonwealth of Virginia, just making things easier than we might think. And that is really, I think, a repeatable theme for the whole Renaissance. And Paul, you can probably attest to that. I've heard some other people mention it. Once you dive into the brownfield box of chocolates and start taking a few bites, it does get easier. The acronyms.
It does get easier. And I see a question from Carrie in the chat room here from Carrie Hearn. About financing on these, and that's really a tremendous success story. Is 5 years ago, if we went into a bank and said that we want to finance a solar project number one, it would be, oh gosh, not one of those. Nowadays, frankly, we're getting calls from banks, and it's really rather common. The trends of community solar and brownfields do not scare banks or financial institutions any longer. And I see a question about green banks, which is really cool. New York State has had a green bank, which is really an institution that's intended to facilitate, kind of sow the seed so that, commercial banks can kind of maybe co-lend or be a partner in it, make some funds available to just basically, start the pot. And those are really, in New York, it's been tremendously useful. We've had some projects where the Green Bank gave us construction loans, and that worked out okay. We've had others where the off-taker was a religious organization that's been in existence for a long time but didn't publish financials. So commercial banks were leery about that. And then we've had some that were simply, we're going to be using a new technology, a new brand of solar panels or something else, which was not particularly scary, but it did make a big difference. So I think the Green Bank story, which is coming nationwide, all of us in the solar industry just noticed that, the new Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, has appointed Jigar Shah, who's perhaps the most famous person in the solar industry. He's now in charge of the lending program within the DOE. And I think that's a real sign that the green bank movement is likely to go national.
I can only hope so, and maybe a national infrastructure bank too. That's part of my dream. And hashtag Biden structure. Let's hope this time one of these infrastructure weeks is actually going to pay off. A little bit of federal policy tailwind would be huge right now, particularly in Virginia where they're already leaning in. Paul, thank you so much for your time and blazing the trail so brightly these last couple decades, being early in this work, your support of Virginia, and your support of this event, Terawatt sponsor BQ Energy. Any final word here in the last 30 seconds we have?
Future is bright, Dan.
The future's as bright as we're building it, and thanks for getting the construction started, my man. Really just kudos as a carbon-based life form. Thank you. And Paul, Meade, Nick and Daniel can be coming back to Paul. I know you're super busy, but you're free to join the expert exchange that's happening at the end of the day. You can just use your same login credentials. Come back. You might have some additional questions for Paul. I know we couldn't get to it in the hour. We really like to slow this down in person. We will again in 2022 and chew at this 300s level again. So thanks again, Paul, and the entire BQ team.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.